My adoptive parents waited 3 years to harvest my womb for their real daughter, so I left them with empty cribs instead. In my family, I was taught that 18 meant freedom, but for me, it meant my parents finally revealing they'd been waiting 3 years to harvest my womb for their real daughter. The Hamiltons chose me from foster care when I was 15. After bouncing between 12 different homes, their mansion felt like stepping into a fairy tale. They had a daughter named Claire who was 24 and glowing with the kind of beauty that came from never wondering where your next meal would come from. She had everything except the ability to have children, though I wouldn't learn that for 3 more years. They gave me a bedroom with lavender walls because I'd mentioned once that it was my favorite color. That first night, Mrs. Hamilton found me crying on the floor, terrified I'd wake up back in the group home. She held me, whispering that I was home now, really home. I believed her. For 3 years, I had everything. Private school where kids complained about the wrong color Mercedes, violin lessons with a teacher who said I had natural talent, family vacations to Italy and Hawaii. They called me their daughter and bought me prom dresses and cheered at my school plays. Ryan was the only person who knew about my past. We'd been together 2 years, and he was the first person who made me feel like I deserved good things. He promised we'd build something beautiful together, something that was ours. My 18th birthday started with French toast and fresh strawberries, Mom decorating the whole kitchen with streamers while Dad gave me a jewelry box that played Chopin. That night, they took me to Le Bernardin, the kind of restaurant where water comes in crystal glasses and the waiter explains each fork. I was laughing at Dad's terrible joke about escargot when Mom set down her wine glass with a delicate clink and exchanged a look with Claire that made my stomach turn. Now that you're 18, Mom began, her voice suddenly businesslike, we need to discuss your purpose in this family. Purpose. The word slithered across the white tablecloth toward me. Dad pulled out a leather folder, the expensive kind he used for his real estate deals, and slid papers across to me. Medical documents, fertility test results, genetic compatibility charts, all with my name, all dated over the past 3 years. Every doctor's appointment they'd said was for my health, every blood test they'd said was routine. It had all been for this. We chose you specifically, Dad said, like he was explaining a business merger. Claire needs a surrogate, someone young, healthy, genetically compatible. You're perfect. Claire leaned forward, and for the first time I saw the desperation she'd been hiding. Her voice shook as she explained I would live with her during the pregnancies, multiple pregnancies, at least 3 children. I would follow strict dietary protocols, exercise regimens, take prenatal vitamins they'd already purchased, sign papers saying the children were never mine, never tell them I carried them. After I finished giving her babies, they'd generously allow me to attend whatever college I had in mind. The restaurant sounds faded until all I could hear was my heartbeat and Claire saying, I've been waiting 3 years for you to be ready. Think of everything we've given you, Mom said when I couldn't speak. The life you'd have without us. Foster kids like you don't get opportunities like this. We saved you from the streets. Dad's voice turned sharp as the steak knife beside my untouched plate. The college fund, the car we promised, your whole future, it all depends on your cooperation. I made it to my lavender bedroom before I vomited. 3 years of French toast mornings and forehead kisses had been preparation. They hadn't saved me. They'd been fattening me up for slaughter. Ryan found me on my bathroom floor at midnight, still in my birthday dress. He held me while I told him everything, promising we'd figure it out together. A week later at Sunday dinner, I watched Mom pass the mashed potatoes and made my move. Ryan and I are getting married. We want to start our own family right away. I can't be Claire's surrogate if I'm trying to have my own babies. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked 5 times before anyone moved. Then Mom's voice could have frozen blood. Then you're cut off. Everything. Now. She grabbed my phone from the table and powered it off with one manicured finger. Dad held out his palm for my car keys. You have 1 week to reconsider or get out. Claire exploded from her chair, her perfect composure shattering like the wine glass she knocked over. I've waited 3 years for your body. 3 years of watching you grow up, knowing you'd save me. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. I nodded, pretending to reconsider while my survival instincts screamed. The next day, I took 3 buses to Planned Parenthood, clutching cash from my violin case just in case they tried to force me. While pretending to pack slowly, I found a box in the attic that made my blood freeze. Files on 3 other foster girls who'd lived in my room before me. Michelle, incompatible after further testing. Sarah, ran away. Jessica, unsuitable temperament. All had escaped before their 18th birthdays. I was the first who stayed. That night, I slipped out the window I used to stare at stars from, a backpack holding everything that mattered. My feet hit the manicured grass, and I ran. I thought I was free until I got to Ryan's apartment and found a check on his counter for $50,000 and a single line for delivering her to us on schedule. His signature was at the bottom of the delivery confirmation. 3 years of love letters suddenly made sense. 3 years of him being the only one who understood. I turned to leave, but Ryan was already standing in his doorway, blocking my only exit. They're on their way, he said softly. Car headlights swept across the apartment parking lot, illuminating Ryan's face for a moment. His hands shook as he gripped the doorframe, blocking my only escape route. The backpack straps cut into my shoulders as I took a step backward, my mind racing through options that didn't exist. They paid you to love me? The words came out as a whisper, but they hit him like a physical blow. His guilty silence stretched between us. 3 years of manufactured affection crumbling in the space of a heartbeat. I fainted left, then dove right, trying to slip past him. His hand shot out, grabbing my backpack strap and yanking me backward. I stumbled, nearly falling, and he used the momentum to pull me closer. You were the easiest mark I ever had, he said, his voice hollow. Foster kid, desperate for love. The Hamiltons knew exactly what they were looking for. Mrs. Hamilton's voice echoed up the stairwell, sharp and commanding. Ryan, do you have her? My violin case hung across my body, the hard edges pressing against my ribs. Without thinking, I swung it forward, striking Ryan's knee with all the force I could manage. He cried out, his grip loosening as he stumbled sideways. The instrument that had symbolized my new life, my escape into something beautiful, had become my weapon. I bolted past him, racing toward the back stairs. His shouts followed me, giving the Hamiltons directions about about the building's layout, the exits, where I might run. My feet pounded down the concrete steps, each impact jarring through my bones. The alley behind the building stretched out before me, narrow and grimy. Dad Hamilton's Mercedes blocked one end, its headlights creating harsh shadows against the brick walls. At the other end, Claire sat in her white BMW, engine running. They'd coordinated this, planned for every escape route. A dumpster sat against the building wall, its lid closed. I scrambled onto it, sneakers slipping on the slick metal surface. My fingers found the bottom rung of the fire escape ladder, rust flaking off under my grip. "She's climbing!" Claire's scream pierced the night air. Her designer heels clicked against the asphalt as she got out of her car, the sound echoing off the alley walls. I pulled myself up, muscles burning from the effort. The metal groaned under my weight, but held. From the second floor landing, I could see them all converging below. The Hamiltons in their expensive clothes looked absurd in this grimy alley, like mannequins that had wandered out of a department store window. Mrs. Hamilton stepped forward, her voice taking on that trembling quality she used when she wanted to appear vulnerable. "Sweetheart, you're confused. We only want to talk. Come down and we can work this out." Dad Hamilton stood beside her, his phone in his hand, thumb moving rapidly across the screen, calling for backup maybe, or activating some plan they'd prepared for this moment. The fire escape connected to several apartment windows. Most had bars or were painted shut, but one on the second floor sat slightly open, a gap just wide enough. I pressed my face against the glass, seeing an elderly woman inside watching television. I pushed the window wider and slipped through, my backpack catching on the frame for a terrifying moment before I yanked it free. The woman's coffee mug crashed to the floor, ceramic shards scattering across the linoleum. She stared at me, hand moving toward the phone on her side table. Through the window, I watched the Hamiltons argue in the alley. Mom's perfect composure cracked as she gestured wildly at Dad, their voices carrying up but words indistinct. Claire paced beside her car, cell phone pressed to her ear. The perfect family facade they'd maintained for 3 years was fracturing under the pressure of losing their investment. The elderly woman, Doris according to the nameplate by her door, studied me with sharp eyes. She recognized me from the neighborhood, had seen me coming and going from Ryan's building. When she offered to call the police, I found myself begging her not to, words tumbling out about foster care and surrogacy and 3 years of lies. She listened without interrupting, then handed me her phone. I needed to check my email, to see if there was anything I'd missed. 3 years of messages from Ryan loaded on the screen, and reading them now was like decoding a predator's playbook. Every sweet message, every declaration of love had been carefully crafted. "Can't wait to meet the girl who deserves real love. You're so special, so different from anyone I've known." The manipulation was surgical in its precision. The Hamiltons' voices drifted up from the hallway. They were going door to door, their story already prepared. "Our daughter is having a mental health crisis. She's confused, off her medication. We're so worried about her." My phone, the one Mom had taken, buzzed somewhere. They must have turned it back on. Emma, my best friend from school, would be texting, worried about the cryptic message I'd sent her before leaving. She thought she was texting me, but Ryan would see it all now. "Your mom called saying you ran away? Are you okay?" Doris disappeared into her bedroom and returned with an armful of clothes. "These were my daughters," she said quietly. "She passed 2 years ago. The clothes still smell like lavender." She loved that scent. The coincidence made my skin crawl, but I pulled on the oversized hoodie anyway. Doris mentioned she'd been a social worker for 30 years, had seen this before. Foster kids who became prey, families who took them in for all the wrong reasons. Using Doris's ancient desktop computer, I logged into my cloud storage. The screenshots I'd taken of the other foster girls' files were still there. I downloaded them quickly, saving copies to a flash drive Doris provided. The Hamiltons might be able to wipe my phone remotely, but they couldn't touch these. A knock rattled Doris's door. Ryan's voice pitched to sound concerned and reasonable. "Mrs. Chen, have you seen a teenage girl, brown hair, about this tall? She's sick and needs her medication. Her family is very worried." He knew which apartment. Of course he did. He'd probably watched me climb through the window, guided them here. Doris moved to the door with surprising grace for her age, while I slipped into her bedroom closet. The smell of mothballs and old perfume surrounded me. "Haven't seen anyone," Doris lied smoothly. "Been watching my shows all evening. Is everything all right?" "She's confused," Ryan continued. "Off her meds. If you see her, please call this number immediately. She could hurt herself." His footsteps retreated reluctantly. Through the thin walls, I heard him knock on the next door, repeating the same lies. Doris returned to the living room, muttering under her breath. "Foster kids know predators. They can smell them a mile away. That boy reeks of it." She positioned herself by the window, giving me updates on the Hamiltons' movements. They'd regrouped by their cars, Claire gesticulating wildly. Even from here, I could read her body language. 3 years wasted. 3 years of waiting for nothing. Doris's neighbor texted her about the fancy people causing a scene, asking if she was okay. The building's residents were starting to notice, starting to question. The Hamiltons' money and influence only went so far in a place like this. My violin teacher, Ms. Petrova, lived 6 blocks away. She'd always said if I ever needed anything, her door was open. She'd noticed things over the years, bruises that weren't there, the way I sometimes flinched when someone moved too quickly. She never pushed, but she noticed. Before leaving, I gave Doris the flash drive with all the evidence. She promised to make copies, to keep them safe just in case. Her hands were steady as she took it, the hands of someone who'd protected children her whole career. "Wait 10 minutes, she advised. "They'll circle back to the front of the building. Go out through the basement exit, through the laundry room." I pulled the hoodie's hood up, tucking my hair inside. In the mirror by Doris's door, I looked like a different person. Older, tired, like someone who'd learned the world's harsh lessons too young. The basement smelled of detergent and mildew. I navigated between washing machines, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The exit opened onto a side street, away from where the Hamiltons waited. 6 blocks stretched before me like an eternity. Every car could be them, every shadow could be Ryan. But I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, the way I'd learned to survive in 12 different foster homes. The night air bit at my exposed skin, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, somewhere in that alley, the Hamiltons were realizing their perfect plan had failed. Their chosen surrogate, their 3-year investment, had slipped through their manicured fingers. but I knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't give up easily. 3 years of planning, 3 years of careful grooming didn't end with one failed capture. They'd come for me again, and next time they'd be better prepared. For now, though, I had 6 blocks of freedom and a violin teacher who might believe an impossible story. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had an hour ago when I'd stood frozen in Ryan's doorway, watching my world collapse. The lavender scent from Doris's daughter's clothes followed me through the empty streets, a ghost of someone else's life wrapped around my shoulders. I wondered if she'd known, somehow, that her clothes would one day help another girl escape, if she'd understand why her mother had kept them, waiting for someone who needed them. 5 blocks, 4, 3. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. Somewhere behind me, the Hamiltons were probably expanding their search, calling in favors, activating whatever network they'd use to find and pay Ryan. 2 blocks. 1. Ms. Petrova's building rose before me, ordinary and safe. I pressed her buzzer with shaking fingers, praying she was home, praying she'd answer, praying she'd believe me when I told her why I was really here. Ms. Petrova's voice crackled through the intercom, groggy but alert. I explained it was me, that I needed help, and the buzzer sounded immediately. Her apartment door opened before I reached it, and she pulled me inside without questions. Her face hardened as I explained everything, the words pouring out in a desperate rush. She nodded at certain points, her expression growing darker. When I finished, she revealed something that made my stomach drop. She'd been uncomfortable with how the Hamiltons discussed my purpose in their family during recitals. The way they'd insisted on private lessons, always wanting updates on my progress, had triggered old instincts from her childhood in Eastern Europe. I borrowed her phone to text Emma a cryptic message, begging her to come to Ms. Petrova's address. While waiting, I wrote everything down in one of Petrova's notebooks, getting the details on paper while they were fresh. Emma arrived within 30 minutes, initially skeptical about my story until I showed her the screenshots of the other foster girls' files. Her face went pale when she recognized one of the names. She remembered seeing Michelle at the mall with the Hamiltons years ago, remembered thinking how sad the girl looked despite the shopping bags. The memory had stuck with her because Michelle disappeared from social media shortly after, and Emma had always wondered what happened. The Hamiltons escalated their search quickly. Within hours, they'd posted on the neighborhood Facebook groups about their troubled daughter who needed medication. My school photo stared back at us from Emma's phone screen as comments poured in with supposed sightings. People who'd never met me claimed they'd seen me acting erratically at the grocery store, the park, the library. Emma recorded my testimony on her phone while Ms. Petrova called a police friend off the record. The officer listened but explained that without immediate danger or proof of a crime, it remained a family matter. Adult children left home all the time. The surrogacy discussion, while disturbing, wasn't illegal if no force was involved. Emma created a fake social media account to monitor the Hamiltons' posts and gather intelligence. Through it, we discovered Claire had been active in fertility forums for 5 years, discussing alternative surrogacy arrangements. Some of her posts made my skin crawl. She'd researched international adoption loopholes, fertility tourism, and had even posted about the ideal age for surrogates. Ms. Petrova's elderly neighbor knocked on the door, mentioning she'd seen a young black girl leaving the Hamilton house crying 2 years ago. The description matched Michelle from the files. The neighbor had always wondered about it but hadn't wanted to interfere in what seemed like family business. I decided to contact Ms. Rodriguez, my old foster care caseworker. Her number still worked, and she answered on the 3rd ring. When I explained the situation, her silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she revealed she'd had concerns about the Hamilton adoption but couldn't prove anything. Her supervisor had dismissed her worries as bias against wealthy families. The Hamiltons escalated further, calling my school to report a psychiatric emergency. They claimed I needed immediate intervention, painting a picture of a disturbed girl who'd misunderstood a generous offer to help with college expenses. The school, bound by privacy laws, couldn't confirm or deny my enrollment status to concerned callers. Ms. Rodriguez's revelation hit like a punch to the gut. I was the 4th girl in this pattern. 3 before me, same age range, same foster care background, same sudden departures. She tried to flag it, but the Hamiltons' sterling reputation and generous donations to foster care charities had silenced any questions. Ryan started texting my old phone, which the Hamiltons had reactivated. Emma showed me the messages on her fake account where someone had screenshot and shared them. He claimed he loved me, that the money meant nothing, that we could work things out. Each text made Emma angrier, until she threw her phone across Petrova's couch in disgust. I asked Rodriguez about contacting the other foster girls. 2 had aged out and left the state immediately after turning 18. Their forwarding addresses led nowhere. The 3rd girl's whereabouts remained unknown. She'd simply vanished from the system. But Rodriguez remembered their names, remembered their faces, remembered her growing unease with each placement. The Hamiltons appeared at Emma's house next, forcing her parents into an awkward conversation. They spun a tale of mental health concerns and medication non-compliance, but Emma's parents noticed inconsistencies in their story. When pressed for specifics about my supposed condition, the Hamiltons fumbled, their prepared script failing under scrutiny. Rodriguez dug deeper into her old files, discovering she'd noted concerns about the Hamiltons' foster license renewal timeline. Each girl had been placed with them just as the previous one aged out, a pattern too perfect to be coincidence. Her supervisor had dismissed it as efficient placement, praising the Hamiltons for always having room for another child in need. Emma's parents grew suspicious enough to ask the Hamiltons to leave. The shift in their demeanor was immediate. Mrs. Hamilton's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Emma's father, a mild-mannered accountant, stood firm at his doorway until they retreated to their Mercedes. My search for the 3rd foster girl yielded unexpected results. Jessica, now 22, maintained a small social media presence 3 towns over. Her profile bio simply read, "Survivor," and her posts focused on trauma recovery and rebuilding life after abuse. My hands shook as I typed a message explaining who I was and why I was reaching out. Ms. Petrova offered her couch indefinitely, framing it as one artist supporting another. She'd fled her own country to escape people who'd tried to control her, and she recognized the same desperation in my eyes. Her apartment became my safe house, her elderly neighbors my early warning system against the Hamilton searches. Jessica responded within minutes, her message simple and direct. panicked. She'd known they'd try again, had been waiting for this call. We arranged a video chat, and her story filled in horrifying gaps. Claire had already been practicing pregnancy symptoms when Jessica lived there, wearing a fake belly around the house, decorating nurseries that would never hold babies. Rather than continuing to hide, I decided to take control of the narrative. Emma helped me draft my own social media post, carefully worded to avoid legal issues while sharing my truth. We included just enough detail to be believed without making accusations that could backfire. Jessica revealed more during our call. She'd discovered Claire's obsession went deeper than anyone imagined. Claire had baby clothes hidden in her closet, had picked out names, had even practiced breastfeeding techniques with dolls. The desperation wasn't new. It had been building for years before they started taking in foster girls. She shared photos she'd managed to take before escaping, medical documents showing fertility clinic consultations about gestational surrogacy with household members. The clinics had refused, citing ethical concerns, which had apparently driven the Hamiltons to their foster care scheme. Parents at my school began questioning the Hamiltons' story after my friends defended my character online. Teachers who'd known me for 3 years posted about my academic achievements, my volunteer work, my complete lack of mental health issues. The narrative the Hamiltons tried to construct started crumbling under the weight of contradicting evidence. The perfect Hamilton reputation cracked as neighbors began sharing their observations. Several mentioned never seeing baby photos of the adopted daughters, how the Hamiltons always changed the subject when asked about their girls' younger years. Small oddities that had seemed like quirks now appeared sinister in hindsight. Rodriguez connected me with a pro bono family lawyer who confirmed my legal rights as an adult. The Hamiltons had no legal authority over me, couldn't force me to return, couldn't access my medical records without consent. The lawyer advised documenting everything and avoiding any direct contact that could be construed as harassment. The Hamiltons made a critical mistake at the grocery store. Mrs. Hamilton encountered a neighbor who asked about me, and her careful mask finally shattered completely. She called me an ungrateful bitch who'd been given everything, her voice rising until other shoppers turned to stare. Someone recorded the outburst, posting it with a caption questioning if this was really the loving mother searching for her sick daughter. The video spread through local social media groups within hours. The contrast between Mrs. Hamilton's public persona and her venomous rage was jarring. Comments poured in from people reconsidering their assumptions about the situation. Some shared their own observations about the family's strange dynamics over the years. Ryan appeared at Misty Petrova's building, but the neighbors had formed an informal network. Mrs. Chen from the second floor called up immediately, warning that he was in the lobby. Mr. Garcia from across the hall positioned himself by his peephole, ready to intervene if needed. The building's residents had decided to protect one of their own. Jessica revealed the final piece of the puzzle during another call. She'd overheard the Hamiltons arguing about the Sarah problem before she escaped. Sarah had apparently discovered their plans too early, had tried to warn authorities, but no one believed a foster kid over respected community members. Her disappearance from the system suddenly made terrible sense. I made a decision that would define everything that followed. No more girls would end up in lavender bedrooms, groomed for years only to discover their purpose on their 18th birthday. The Hamiltons' ability to foster would end with me, whatever it took to accomplish that. Emma's parents joined 3 other school families in publicly supporting me. They shared their own observations about the Hamiltons' controlling behavior at school events, how they'd monitored my friendships, insisted on knowing where I was at all times. Details that had seemed like overprotective parenting now revealed a more sinister pattern. The Hamiltons attempted damage control, claiming I'd misunderstood their generous surrogacy offer. But their story kept changing. First I was mentally ill, then I was ungrateful, then I was confused about a simple conversation. The inconsistencies made more people question what was really happening. The violin teacher community rallied next. Several teachers came forward about Claire's invasive questions regarding their young students, particularly those from difficult backgrounds. She'd asked about home situations, family support systems, which students might need extra help. Everyone had assumed she was being charitable. My story spread through private parenting groups as a cautionary tale. Parents shared their own experiences with families who'd seemed too good to be true, adoption stories that had ended badly, the importance of listening when children tried to tell them something was wrong. Jessica produced the most damning evidence yet: canceled checks she'd photographed before escaping, regular $50,000 payments to R. Mitchell, matching Ryan's timeline perfectly. The Hamiltons had found him the same way they'd found us, targeting someone desperate enough to play their game. Claire's response to mounting pressure was a tearful video about her fertility journey. She spoke about the pain of being unable to have children, the dreams of motherhood that haunted her. But instead of generating sympathy, the comments section exploded with disgust. People recognized manipulation when they saw it, especially when she never once acknowledged the girls she'd tried to use. Mr. Hamilton's real estate partners began distancing themselves as the scandal affected his business reputation. Deals fell through as clients questioned his ethics. The country club crowd that had once embraced them now whispered behind their backs. Social death in their circles was swift and merciless. Ryan's employer received anonymous tips about his involvement in the scheme. Co-workers started asking uncomfortable questions about his relationship with a high school student, about large deposits in his account, about his connection to the Hamiltons. The carefully constructed life he'd built on their money began to crumble. 2 journalists from the local paper reached out after seeing the social media discussions. They'd been investigating suspicious foster care patterns in the area, had noticed the Hamilton name appearing repeatedly. My story connected dots they'd been trying to link for months. The principal at my school issued a carefully worded statement supporting my character and questioning the narrative being spread about me. Without directly accusing anyone, she made it clear the school had never observed any concerning behavior from me. Teachers who'd wanted to speak up felt emboldened to share their own observations. Jessica drove down to meet me in person, bringing a box of evidence she'd been saving. Photos, documents, recordings she'd made of conversations she'd overheard. She'd known this day would come, had prepared for when the Hamiltons would try again with another girl. Initial relief at gathering support turned sour when I realized the Hamiltons were adapting their strategy. They quietly reached out to distant relatives, spinning tales about temporary custody of their troubled daughter. They painted themselves as loving parents trying to help a child with mental health issues, seeking family support in a difficult time. Mr. Hamilton discovered the accounts he'd set up for my college fund had been emptied on my 18th birthday. Rodriguez had advised me months ago to transfer everything into my own account the moment I became a legal adult. The fury in his voice when he called the bank was audible through the phone when the manager confirmed I had every legal right to the money. The Hamiltons hired a reputation management firm to flood social media with positive stories about their charity work. Old photos from fundraisers appeared everywhere, testimonials from people they'd helped over the years. But the internet had a long memory, and people started questioning why they needed such aggressive PR if they were just worried parents. Former foster children in online support groups began sharing their own Hamilton experiences. Not all had been targeted for surrogacy, but all remembered strange questions about their medical history, inappropriate interest in their physical development, comments about their genetic background that had made them uncomfortable. Important relationships solidified around the truth. Emma's family offered their guest room if I needed it. Ms. Petrova's neighbors created a schedule to ensure someone was always watching for the Hamiltons. Doris checked in daily, having made dozens of copies of the evidence I'd entrusted to her. Even strangers who'd only heard the story online offered support and resources. The local newspaper story broke with a carefully worded headline about questions surrounding a prominent family's foster care history. Anonymous sources included former staff from fertility clinics who remembered the Hamiltons' increasingly desperate requests. The article avoided direct accusations, but painted a disturbing picture through carefully verified facts. Armed with accumulated evidence and witness statements, I felt the tide turning. Public opinion shifted decisively as more people recognized the pattern of predatory behavior. A hashtag began trending locally as others shared their own stories of exploitation by seemingly charitable families. The Hamiltons' lawyer sent cease and desist letters to anyone speaking publicly about the situation, but truth was an absolute defense, and no one backed down from sharing their honest experiences. The legal threats only made them look more guilty in the court of public opinion. Claire's public breakdown at her country club happened during their annual charity luncheon. She stood up mid-speech about supporting foster youth and started screaming about ungrateful foster trash who didn't appreciate opportunities. The room full of wealthy donors watched in horror as she knocked over champagne flutes and threw her designer purse at the wall. Security had to escort her out while she shrieked about wasted years and empty wombs. The security footage from multiple locations began corroborating my timeline perfectly. The restaurant confirmed the private dining room reservation on my 18th birthday, complete with timestamps showing when we arrived and when I fled to the bathroom. Building security cameras caught me leaving Ryan's apartment building in distress. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the Hamiltons' carefully constructed lies. Doris proved invaluable when the original foster care files mysteriously vanished from county records. She'd made 12 copies and distributed them to trusted friends, ensuring the evidence survived. Her decades of social work experience had taught her that documents had a way of disappearing when powerful people felt threatened. Community members who'd stayed silent for years suddenly found their voices. The pediatrician who'd performed my required physicals admitted she'd always felt uncomfortable with the Hamiltons' excessive interest in my reproductive health. The dentist mentioned they'd insisted on genetic testing during routine cleanings, small violations of boundaries that had seemed odd but not actionable at the time. Ryan's attempt to save himself backfired spectacularly. He released a statement claiming he'd been manipulated too, that the Hamiltons had found him when he was vulnerable and desperate. This enraged them enough to threaten exposing exactly how they'd recruited him, through forums for young men with gambling debts who needed quick money. The hired predator had turned on his employers. I began to see our entire relationship differently. Every sweet gesture had been calculated. The way he'd accidentally run into me at the library where I studied, how he'd known my favorite coffee order before I'd told him. The Hamiltons had provided him with a detailed dossier on their investment. Some community members, influenced by the Hamiltons' PR firm, started suggesting I'd simply misunderstood a legitimate surrogacy discussion. They posted about how surrogacy was a beautiful gift and maybe I'd overreacted to a generous offer. But survivors recognized gaslighting, and the foster care community pushed back hard with their own experiences. Ms. Petrova received an eviction notice from her building's management company, which happened to be owned by one of Mr. Hamilton's business partners. But her neighbors rallied immediately. They organized a tenant meeting, contacted housing advocates, and made it clear that any attempt to remove her would face massive resistance. The management company backed down within days. I had to make a choice when the Hamiltons' lawyer contacted me through Rodriguez. They offered a substantial settlement, enough to pay for college and start my life, in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and publicly stating I'd misunderstood their intentions. The number they offered would solve every financial worry I'd ever have. The decision took less than a second. Money couldn't buy back the 3 years they'd stolen. It couldn't erase the knowledge that they'd done this before and would do it again. I instructed Rodriguez to tell them no amount would buy my silence. Their final desperate gambit began with an invitation to a community meeting about foster care reform. The Hamiltons would be there, their lawyer promised, ready to apologize and make amends publicly. They wanted to use the platform to rehabilitate their image while appearing contrite. I knew it was a trap, but decided to spring it. The community center was packed when I arrived with Emma, Ms. Petrova, and Jessica. The Hamiltons sat at the front with their legal team, looking every inch the concerned philanthropists. Their supporters had arrived early to fill strategic seats, but our supporters were there too. Teachers, neighbors, other foster care survivors who'd driven hours to stand with us. Face to face with them for the first time since my escape, I felt my body remember the fear, but I wasn't alone anymore. Mrs. Hamilton leaned close as I passed, hissing threats about ruining my future, destroying my chances at college, ensuring no one would ever hire me. Her mask had slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath the pearls. Claire's breakdown was swift and total. When community members started asking pointed questions about the other foster girls, she stood up and screamed that she'd been promised a baby since she was 19. 10 years of waiting, of planning, of preparing nurseries and buying clothes for children who never came. Her parents had promised to fix her problem, to find her the perfect surrogate who couldn't say no. The revelation that this went back a decade stunned even me. The Hamiltons hadn't just exploited foster girls, they'd groomed their own daughter into a predator, feeding her obsession instead of getting her help. The room erupted as people realized the depth of the conspiracy. Then Sarah walked in. She'd been living under a different name 3 states away, but her foster care advocate had been protecting her, helping her rebuild. When she heard about the meeting, she'd insisted on coming. She wouldn't hide anymore, she said, not when other girls were at risk. Confronted with 2 of their victims, Mr. Hamilton made a cold calculation. His business was crumbling, his social standing destroyed, his wife becoming increasingly unhinged. He stood up and announced he would cooperate with any investigation in exchange for immunity from civil suits. He'd testify about the payments to Ryan, about the fertility clinics that had refused them, about the foster care workers they'd paid to look the other way. Mrs. Hamilton launched herself at her husband with a primal scream. She clawed at his face, screaming about betrayal, about abandoning Claire's only chance at motherhood. Security guards pulled her off as she shrieked obscenities that echoed through the community center. The elegant woman who'd held me as I cried on my first night in their home was gone, replaced by something feral and desperate. Ryan tried to slip out during the chaos, but Sarah spotted him immediately. She stood up and pointed, her voice carrying over the noise. She identified him as the man who'd groomed her too, who'd told her she was special, who'd been paid to deliver her to the Hamiltons just like he'd been paid to deliver me. The room turned on him as people realized he wasn't just complicit. He was a serial predator who'd helped destroy multiple girls' lives for money. He ran for the exit but found it blocked by foster care advocates who'd heard enough. Claire's final manipulation attempt was the most pathetic. She stood on a chair and threatened to hurt herself if I didn't recant everything, if I didn't admit I'd misunderstood, if I didn't give her the babies she deserved. The room fell silent as she held a letter opener to her wrist, demanding I take responsibility for her pain. I looked at the woman who'd pretended to be my sister for 3 years and felt nothing but pity. I told her calmly that her choices were her own, that her pain didn't give her the right to steal other people's bodies, that she needed help, but I wouldn't be manipulated anymore. Security gently talked her down and led her away as she sobbed about empty arms and broken promises. The community meeting voted overwhelmingly to support foster care reform measures and create a fund for survivors of exploitation. They established new oversight protocols and mandatory training about predatory adoption practices, real change, driven by survivors and allies who'd finally been heard. Without their parents' money or protection, Claire faced the reality that no ethical surrogacy agency would work with someone with her history. The psychological evaluations alone would disqualify her. Her dreams of motherhood, twisted as they'd become, were over. The Hamiltons' house went on the market within a week. Legal fees from multiple civil suits drained their resources. The country club revoked their membership. Their charity positions disappeared overnight. The social circle that had defined their identity closed ranks against them. Jessica, Sarah, and I met for dinner at a small restaurant downtown. No fancy water glasses or multiple forks, just 3 survivors planning how to protect others. We talked about starting a support network, sharing our stories with foster care organizations, making sure caseworkers knew the warning signs. Rodriguez sent word that the Hamiltons' foster care license had been permanently revoked. Multiple states had flagged their file. They'd never be allowed near vulnerable children again. It wasn't justice in the legal sense, but it was protection for future victims. The violin I'd left behind was returned to me by one of the Hamiltons' former housekeepers. She'd saved it when they'd tried to throw it away, knowing it meant something to me. I held it for a long time, remembering the girl who'd believed she'd found a fairy tale family. 6 months later, I stood on a small stage at a community center, tuning that same violin. The benefit concert for foster youth had been Jessica's idea. We'd raised enough to fund emergency housing for kids aging out of the system, for those who needed somewhere safe to run. The audience wasn't huge, maybe 50 people, but they were the ones who mattered. Miss Petrova sat in the front row, pride evident on her weathered face. Emma and her parents were there, the family who'd stood up to the Hamiltons when it mattered. Doris had brought her whole building, the neighbors who'd formed a protective wall around me. Sarah and Jessica flanked the stage, our chosen sisterhood forged in survival. We'd found each other not through the family the Hamiltons had pretended to offer, but through the truth of what they'd tried to take from us. As I raised my bow, I caught sight of a young girl in the audience, maybe 15, wearing a group home ID bracelet. She watched with the wary hope I recognized from my own reflection at that age. This concert was for her, for all the girls who needed to know that fairy tales weren't real, but survival was. The first notes filled the space, not perfect, but honest. Somewhere across town, the Hamiltons were packing up the remnants of their carefully constructed life. Claire's womb would remain as empty as the lavender bedroom they'd used as bait. But here in this room, with these people, something real was being built. The music swelled, and I played not for the family that had tried to own me, but for the community that had chosen to see me. Justice hadn't come through courts or police or systems that had failed us before. It had come through the fierce protection of ordinary people who'd finally decided that some things mattered more than reputation or comfort. As the last note faded, I lowered my violin and looked at the audience. The girl with the group home bracelet was crying, but she was also smiling. She saw what I'd needed to see at her age, that there was life after the fairy tale ended, that real families were chosen not assigned, that survival could become something more. The Hamiltons had waited 3 years to harvest my womb. Instead, they'd harvested a community of survivors who would ensure no other girl would stand in a lavender bedroom believing she'd finally found home, only to discover she'd been livestock all along. They'd created their own downfall by underestimating the power of foster kids who'd learned to recognize predators and the communities brave enough to believe them.